Hello, everybody. Welcome to This is the Thread. I am Chris Lazar. Thank you for being here. I was going to continue on this episode talking about cell phones and EMF exposure, electromagnetic frequency. Let me turn this down a little. Electromagnetic radiation from the cell phones. Going over some studies. If you remember the last two episodes, the first one I did that was a part of this series, if you will, was just taking a look at the instruction manual in the health and safety caution manual that comes with the phone when you buy it. Came with my phone. It should come with really any phone. Even back in the day with your flip phones, it should have came with it. And seeing what it said in there about EMF that talked about specific absorption rates and what's allowable, and that they use two governing bodies to test what is the maximum that's allowed to your body that won't invoke negative health effects from it. Basically, what's the level that's the safest for the regular consumer? Interesting, if you remember that they put that to keep it away from children, and yet younger and younger people are using these phones each day. Next episode, we took a look at one study that looked at the specific study was titled "Exposure to Cell Phone Radio Frequency Changes Corticotropin Levels in the Histology of the Brain and Adrenal Glands in the Male Wister Rat." This was a study out of Iran, and it basically took rats, had control group, experimental group, two of them. One that was exposed to a cell phone. It was a Nokia phone in the cage, or not in the cage, but I believe it was just strapped like right outside the cage. Was placed beside the cage at a distance of 0.5 centimeters. So there's that. And then there was another experimental group that was exposed longer to the cell phone. What they found was that the cell phone exposure in the experimental group, they found that there was enhanced plasma, ACTH, and cortisol levels from the prolonged exposure. The fasciculata layer of the adrenal cortex eventually thickened following mobile RF radiation. Also, they found in the brain there was vacuolization of brain tissue, and the number of size of vacuoles considerably increased during 2 months of RF exposure. So that was the experimental group. Was, I believe, the first experimental group was exposed for just 1 month. The other one was exposed for, yes, a 2-month time period. Any other thing about this article? I did find it interesting that out of the two experimental groups, the one that was exposed 2 months, it seems like almost had double the ACTH levels compared to the first experimental group. So it's like it like went up like exponentially. It seems like very significant increase. And basically, I was talking about how, I mean, you're talking about increased cortisol. It's increasing your stress response. And then there's some people out there who will say if you don't keep your stress levels like in check, and obviously you need some stress. You need some stress in your life. But if you can't keep them in check and then everything's highly elevated, that there's people out there who say that correlates with cancer. Hey, that correlates with your behavioral health, with your mental health possibly. So that was that study. This study, we're taking a little bit different route. This study I have with me from Ashok Agarwal, Singh, Hamada, Kesari. It was out of the Center for Reproductive Medicine, Cleveland Clinic. So I found something that was published in the United States. The study is titled "Cell Phones and Male Infertility: A Review of Recent Innovations in Technology and Consequences." So this article or study is, like it says, it's a review. So these authors aren't specifically, they didn't formulate a hypothesis and test it. They more so just found a bunch of different studies and just looked at them all. And they talk about the different ways that this is going to affect males specifically. And it's a cool thing because they go over a lot of studies, although also kind of a bad thing because they don't really go into detail about a lot of the studies. It's more so, hey, this is what this guy did. These were the results, instead of saying, hey, here's how they did it. Here are the methods. Here, all the typical stuff you see. There's no intro, no real hypothesis. They just kind of give you the results of all these studies. So it's a cool little review. They go over a lot of stuff. And I'm not going to cover everything today from this study. I'm going to try to break it up into chunks. But they first start off by talking about kind of the same thing that the other article was talking about, general concepts of cell phone physics and biological effects. They say that cell phones emit radio frequency, electromagnetic waves to a nearby relay base or station. Our bodies act as antennas, and our bodies can absorb that radiation. They talk about the specific absorption rate, which is what we absorb, a standardized unit measure of the rate of radio frequency energy absorption in the body, calculated watts per kilogram. Yep. So they just kind of go over some basics, and they kind of touch on, over the years, that the cell phones have been getting more powerful. They went from 902.5 megahertz in the 80s. Decade later, they were almost at 1800 megahertz. And that's a lot. That's a pretty substantial increase in that. They finally kind of get into all the stuff that they're going to review. They basically break it down, and they say you can break down the effects of cell phone on health into two things. The first is a thermal effect, and the second is if it's a non-thermal effect. So a thermal effect, which occurs at particularly high frequencies where the radiation has heating properties, which may lead to increase in tissue or body temperature. And I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but where in males, where sperm are produced in your testes, that you can go online and you can search that your testes need an optimal temperature in order to produce viable sperm, in order to have good morphology of the sperm, I believe, and a good number of the sperm, which is why you hear of people. Remember this Seinfeld episode where Kramer, all he wore was tighty whities, right? And he went into the doctor, and the doctor told him oh my gosh, it's going to be tough for you to have kids. You have a low sperm count. You're going to have to wear boxers. And for the rest of the episode, he tries to wear boxers. He can't do it. And he ends up just going commando. that's neither here nor there. But they say that because when you wear like boxer briefs or tighty whities, sperm are closer to your body heats it up, and therefore they say that that reduces your viable sperm count. So that's the thermal effect. There's also a non-thermal effect, which is manifested by disruption of the cell membrane integrity due to passage of electrical shaking eddy currents formed from body absorption of EMW, endothelial dysfunction, and alterations in the blood-brain barrier, cellular signal transduction effects, immune system effects, and nervous system excitability defects from so thermal, heating up your body, non-thermal, those electromagnetic waves disrupting these functions in your body, creating what they talk about in the article, reactive oxygen species that have the potential to harm your DNA. So, what are the ways that cell phone usage is going to affect male infertility or male fertility? They go over a couple things. One of them, they say alters semen quality in animal and human studies. Altering semen quality in animal and human studies. So they took a look at a couple of these. In a retrospective study involving 371 men of reproductive age, the duration of possession of cell phones and the daily transmission time had a significant negative correlation with the proportion of rapid progressive motile sperm and a significant positive correlation with the proportion of slow progressive motile sperm. So right there, that's something that I didn't know. They're kind of breaking up sperm into two different categories. And I'm assuming you want a higher proportion of rapid, because I'm just assuming for survivability of those sperm, you want them to be rapid so they can get to the egg faster. Because the longer it takes, it's probably a law of like diminishing returns. That's probably not the right way to put it, but the longer it takes the sperm to go to the egg, the less likely it will be to survive and actually get there. And they showed a chart here showing the regressive, that line, and it shows that correlation between them. The correlation here, not super strong, an R of 0.12. So rapid progressive motile sperm, significant negative correlation, R equals negative 0.12 and R equals negative 0.19 respectively. That's not particular. Maybe. See, my science background is not kicking in when I really need it here. There was another study by Wolowiak, performed another retrospective study involving 304 men of reproductive age, noted that there was a significant decrease in the percentage of sperm cells with normal forward progressive motility in correlation with the frequency of cell phone usage. So in the study, 65.7% of the patients, again out of 304 men, without cell phones had over 50% of sperm with forward progressive motility, whereas 17% of patients who frequently, and they define frequently as regular cell phone use for more than 2 years, use cell phones, so the ones who use it frequently, use cell phones frequently, had over 50% of sperm with forward progressive motility. So you see there 17% who had regular cell phone use had over 50%. But if they didn't use their cell phones, 65.7%. But again, that's very interesting to see something like that. But again, we don't know exactly what regular phone use means, right? Yeah, sure. Okay, they used it for 2 years, but we don't know what regular phone use means. Um, Patients without cell phones, that I kind of find a little bit hard to believe. It to me, it's going to kind of depend on when this study was done, because you're telling me you found people with no cell phones in, let's say this study was done in 2018. You're like, really? You found people like that? We're going to have to take in age as a factor too. What if that group who doesn't, think about who doesn't use cell phones? Probably older people. Well, older people are probably naturally going to have decreased sperm counts, just naturally, right? So that's the cool thing about this, again, this review by Agarwal et al. Is that they're going to talk about a lot of different articles and studies published in journals, but they're not going to get to specifics like that, which is a little disappointing, but understandable, because you can't you, you can't be so detailed in all of these in just one paper. Continuing on. Furthermore, Agarwal et al. It's kind of funny. It's the same guy that wrote this study. He's quoting his own study. Conducted a prospective in vitro pilot study exposing 32 neat semen samples to EMW radiation. So those first two were looking at cell phone use, its effect on while you're using it, right? While you have it, in your hands, in your pockets, whatever. Its effect on your sperm. But now this one, they've got the sperm in vitro. I'm assuming like in a petri dish, exposing it to the cell phone. The authors showed a significant decrease in sperm motility and viability, as well as an increase in reactive oxygen species levels. It was concluded that RF EMW emitted from cell phones can lead to an increase in oxidative stress in human spermatozoa, yielding decreased motility and viability. So these last three studies that we just mentioned, talking about how they affect the sperm motility, right? The motility, because sperm, I believe, and it's been a while since I've had biology, they have the flagellum, the tail that propels them forward. Again, you probably want them going forward to move along, to try to get to an egg, to fertilize it, right? You don't want your sperm going all backwards. That would not be good, right? So they were looking at sperm motility. Well, now they try to get they get into this next few studies here. They get into morphology, morphology, and count, sperm count. And right away they talk about this. Wolowiak et al. Noted a significant increase in the percentage of sperm cells with abnormal morphology associated with the duration of exposure to EMW emitted by GSM cell phones. 55.6% of patients without cell phones had over 30% normal sperm morphology, whereas only 16.7% of patients who frequently regular, and they've defined frequent as regular phone use for more than 2 years. Again, I don't know what regular means. So those 16.7% of patients who frequently use their phones had over 30% normal sperm morphology. So it's like, what is that? Almost doubled, almost tripled, really. Yeah. Almost 3 times as less as normal sperm morphology as the people who were without cell phones. But again, the study didn't talk about what good morphology is. I'm sure Wolowiak et al. Did, right? If we had that study in front of us. But in this review, I don't know what good morphology is, basically. I don't know what bad morphology is. That's because I probably know what good morphology is. You know, nothing like it just basically looks like it's supposed to look, and it doesn't have any defects. It doesn't have like a messed up head. It doesn't have a messed up tail or anything like that. I would have liked to have kind of known that if the authors would have been able to describe that. Continue on here, Agarwal et al. Carried out an observational study of 361 men to determine whether there is a correlation between cell phone usage and sperm morphology. Men were divided into 4 usage groups: no use, less than 2 hours a day, 2 to 4 hours a day, and greater than 4 hours a day. Authors report a statistically significant difference in mean World Health Organization normal morphology between the low usage groups and the high usage groups. In addition, the same study found statistically significant differences in sperm motility and viability in the usage groups. Continue on, they cite a Hungarian study on men attending infertility clinic showed significant reduction in sperm count related to cell phone handling. The study followed 231 men over a 13-month period and showed that for heavy users of cell phones, sperm counts were on average 30% lower than men who did not have or use a cell phone. One thing I will say again, and I think I've reiterated it in the past 2 episodes we did, it is so hard to prove that that is all to cell phones. And listen, I want to believe it is. Because I probably, like, it probably is. Like, I want to think that it probably is, but you don't know these people's nutrition. You don't know these people's lifestyle. You don't know these people's prior medical history. And again, maybe that Hungarian study talked about all this. Maybe it did. But in the review here, they didn't really bring that to light. So I would kind of like to check that out and see if they controlled for those factors. If they controlled for weight and BMI and age, race. I don't know if that would make a difference. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to see. Next, they cite an animal study when rats were exposed to electromagnetic radiation via cell phones. This was for 2 hours a day, 35 days at 0.9 specific absorption rate. The exposed group had a decreased mean value of total sperm count, almost half of the value. Like they had almost half the total sperm of the non-exposed group. So that's how it affects infertility. One way that it affects infertility, it affects the motility and the morphology and the count of sperm, potentially, according to these studies. One thing I found interesting, they had a graph here looking at different sperm parameters. It's interesting that between users of cell phones and non-users or users that had used it less than others, there were some parameters that studies looked at that did not show significant differences. These were like sperm volume, liquefaction time, not exactly sure what that means, pH, and viscosity. Where things start to go haywire is, again, in the sperm counts, there's differences. Motility, there's differences. Viability, differences. and morphology. So I'm assuming viability is the potential for it to fertilize the egg. Morphology is like the shape, how it's constructed. Does it have the tools necessary to swim and find the egg? Basically, get there. Does it have the tools? Does it got the legs? Basically. So that's one. It changes the. Oh God, what did I already forgot what this was. It changes the semen quality. Yes, semen quality by morphology, motility, and count. Well, another way, the next way they talk about is changes to reproductive organs in human and animal studies. So this is talking about testicular changes due to Cellphone, EMW, electromagnetic waves, electromagnetic radiation. Let's see what they showed here. They showed increase. Some studies showed increase in the diameter of seminiferous tubes and epithelial thickness, or excuse me, a decrease in the diameter of seminiferous tubes and epithelial thickness. One study by Saunders and Kowalchuk showed significant degeneration of mice seminiferous epithelium due to microwave radiation. Kilari et al. Showed that EMW radiation related to ultrastructural changes in seminiferous tubules. Leydig cells and spermatids in rats' testes. However, there was also studies that found no histological changes in animal testicular tissues. They do mention that it's hard to translate animal studies in this kind of field to humans because rats' testes are located at a different junction of their body than, I guess, humans. What do they say here? First off, the rats' testes are a lot smaller, and their hidden position on the body and their free mobility into the abdomen through the inguinal canal. Interesting. So they can hide. That, I think, is all I wanted to go over today. Next, they're going to talk about postulated mechanisms of Cellphone-related male fertility impairment. So they're going to talk about the thermal effects, the non-thermal effects like oxidative stress that I had mentioned earlier. They're going to talk about alteration of the sperm membrane of the sperm through calcium efflux. They're going to talk about that. They're going to talk about sperm apoptosis. They're going to talk about DNA damage. And they're going to talk about hormonal changes, kind of maybe a little bit what we discussed in that Iranian study. A little bit. So that's kind of what the future holds. I didn't want to throw out everything today. We've been going for almost half an hour, so I think this is a good place to stop. And very interesting. Very interesting stuff. Where's my head at? I'd like to see specifics. Am I going to sit here and tell you that, hey, it's good for you, don't worry about it? No, I'm not going to tell you that. I think there's something here. I just would like to see specifics. I'd like to see, maybe that's my fault for finding a review and not an actual study. Until next time, guys, this is The Thread. Thanks for listening. Chris Lazar, signing out.